Final question is from Kevin S, who's also from the internet. Hello, MBZ and Bally. Now that the heavily rumored NX is a console handheld hybrid, what previously handheld exclusives are you looking forward to making the jump to NX, quality, graphics, processing power-wise? These would be series like Pokemon, Fire Emblem, Phoenix Wright, etc. I have a huge amount of nostalgia for Pokemon Colosseum on the GameCube and look forward to finally having another console Pokemon game to play. Keep up the good work. You guys keep me entertained on my commute to university every week. Cheers, Kevin.
Thanks, Kevin, for the question. Kevin's always great on Twitter, back and forth. Love having him sending stuff in. And Bally, I think we've obviously discussed a lot of the potentiality of how series could change being on NX with the handheld and console divide. But I think he brings up a series which actually strikes me in a way that is kind of surprising, is Phoenix Wright.
Phoenix Wright.
Because when I look at those games, they very much are still in the format that they were during the DS era, or even the GBA era when they first came out, which is very kind of much static images on screen. Not static, I should say. Very well animated, but there's not a lot of full-on movement going on. It's very much going from interstitial to interstitial, and I think that if you were to put a bunch of money and stuff behind that, it could be really cool. Like, you could imagine some really dynamic cutscene stuff with movement back and forth and more direct interaction between the characters, and maybe making the whole investigation sequences, I don't know, a third person kind of behind the back camera sort of walking around type thing. But then you also have to step back and think, well, wait a second, Capcom are not going to put that much money behind a product or a project like that because it's not going to sell these big numbers, right? So as much as we would like to imagine these great things that could be done with these handheld franchises, maybe we need to take the perspective that they were handheld franchises to begin with for a reason, and that their budget was such for a reason. So maybe putting a big heft behind a big blown Phoenix Wright thing wouldn't make as much sense. Now, I'd say that you could argue differently for something like Pokemon, because it is a much larger franchise which does sell huge number of units. But I don't know. I think like I'd have to look across a broad range of handheld games to kind of make that decision as and when. How do you feel about it, Bally?
Yeah, I think it's interesting. It is something we've discussed briefly before. Just randomly, I noticed Emily Rogers' tweet, and I completely agree. Like, the second you have Pokemon on a system, it's going to sell 30 million. Like, that was her rough estimate. That she just basically sort of said, look, the second it's there, it's going to be like that. And I think in and of that sense, once you start talking about them changing up the formula in some way, because it's on NX versus purely handheld, I think you're into dangerous territory, because you're right, like the life cycle and production cycle of handheld games is very specific, and it is often shorter because the number of assets are different and a load of reasons. But essentially, if everything just becomes AAA, it just slows down the production process, and you're not going to see as many games.
Right.
For me personally, handheld games I like. I don't know, because so many handheld games that I do really like, especially from sort of the Game Boy Advance era, 2D Metroid, F-Zero, games like that. I mean, imagine if F-Zero and 2D Metroid come out on NX. First of all, that's incredible. But those were already, Super Nintendo experiences that were brought onto the handheld. So same with Link to the Past, like that top-down Zelda. These all started on the home console. It is series like Phoenix Wright, Professor Layton, perhaps, that
Layton totally
are much newer franchises that did start on handheld. And yeah, I'd be interested to start Phoenix Wright or Professor Layton or something like that on the NX. I think that'd be really cool.
Yes, but like again, it just doesn't make sense for them to funnel money into it, because it's not going to be a big seller. And I think you like looking at all these 3DS games, I'm going through them, and like so many of them are games that are basically shrunk down versions of console games already. So at that point, you don't really have a individual handheld identity for them. Like, you think about things like Mario Kart 7, which, I mean, that game is basically like, it's so similar to Mario Kart 8, and You have things like, I don't know, freaking Animal Crossing, which is kind of the same across both platforms. You have Luigi's Mansion 2, which could have been done on a console, maybe improved in some ways, like made more expansive. But ultimately, I look at the 3DS library and I see so many games which could have been console games anyway. They're just shrunk down and have, you know, a lower budget and obviously are kind of like paired for the system. So, yeah, when I do think about NX, it's like, well, I don't know if they're ultimately going to change that much, because there are so few games out there that were originally handheld that can be transformed in a way to be like home console experiences.
But you still think Phoenix Wright, Perez Layton will come out on NX? You're just saying...
Yeah, totally. I think they will.
They're not going to change the formula just because it's on NX.
No, totally. Like, they may look nicer because there's, you know, better hardware going on, but those games sell well and do well for a reason, and I don't think improving graphic fidelity and adding extraneous features that don't necessarily improve the gameplay itself is going to do anything to further that cause. So it just wouldn't make sense financially, you know? So
yeah, and it's a weird one. We don't even know for sure if the NX is going to be a hybrid, but
the Pokemon Company guy basically said it, Bally. So I think we can, at this point, I think we can drop the pretense. I think everyone kind of assumes that is what it is. But, you know, who knows? Let's be fair. Nintendo are fucking crazy. They could just scrap the idea tomorrow and be like, no, it's a fucking dishwasher that you fucking spin around in like a hamster. I don't know.
And I think ultimately, we've always been hinting at it with this conversation, is that it is just a growing and growing grey area between handheld and console, and it's all that almost just plays in perfectly to what the NX is going to be. It's just,
yeah, exactly.
It's
like as we were saying with the 3DS library, you look at it and you're like, okay, this game is on 3DS and Wii U basically. Like Smash Brothers is here, Mario Kart is here, Animal Crossing is here, like. All these franchises are basically the same thing, but they're having to make two versions right now because they have to serve two markets. And if they have to serve one market, guess what? They can spend more time not making another Mario Kart, but maybe they could spend time making another Mario Kart, but this time not be so conservative and maybe go bold and do something different. And that's actually a more exciting prospect, is maybe getting multiple of these games per cycle, but one of them being conservative and the other one being more out there and doing different things and kind of reusing assets but going in bold directions.
And it's interesting because taking a few, I'm just looking at my 3DS games now as well, and taking like a couple of games that were very distinctively handheld, like Gunman Clive or Pushmo. These are games that came to the Wii U in their own forms anyway.
Right.
So, you know, Pushmo World, the Gunman Clive HD collection, those are games that work so well handheld, and you could argue are a bit strange being on a home console, but ultimately they work, and people see beyond whether a game is, you know, handheld or home console. They just want to play good games.
Yeah, totally. So yeah, I think the whole speculation about like maybe improving the power for these games has games in which it could be potentially applied to, but I think it's more likely that they're just going to be, you know, conservative with it. So there you go. If you enjoyed this discussion and would like to hear more, consider subscribing to us on YouTube and following the podcast playlist. You can also find us on iTunes and various other places. Follow us on Twitter at TNL Podcast and email us thisnintendolife@gmail.com. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time.